In 1914, Lord Frederick Lugard, under the conquering flag of Great Britain, amalgamated the Northern and Southern Protectorates, forming the country presently recognized as Nigeria. Pre-amalgamation and colonialism, the western coast of Africa extending to regions in the hinterlands were made up of compact nations, city-states, and empires. Notable amongst them were the Songhai, Benin, and Nri, Nok, Nupe, and Oyo empires. Each empire was in charge of nations and city-states, each with distinct cultures, language, and customs. One of such empires was the Oyo Empire, which extended from Oyo-Ile to Dahomey. Aside from the physical wars waged on these empires, city-states, and villages, the British also waged psychological and economic warfare. This they did by enforcing education and Christianity in the south, while in the north, Islamic education and religion was enforced.
With the history books, and I mentioned specifically Fafunwa, he recorded that pre-colonialism, as the missionaries came in, Bishop Ajayi Crowther actually established a school in Onitsha. And this was for girls or boys and girls, but specifically girls were mentioned. And it was the case that the girls were steadier in the classes than the boys. The boys would go hunting, come in, look at what they are doing in the classes, with contempt most of the time, and just go away. Some would stay back and continue to attend school. In the West, it was recorded that even in Ishaga, it was the same thing that happened, So what this means is, pre-colonialism, there weren't discriminatory practices around education of women. I do not think so, from what was recorded. Now, if you ask me what happened with colonialism, I can proffer an explanation. It is that for the British, back home, their own women were supposed to be at home, minding the homes. So if they come in here, with their own philosophies of what women are, who women are, and their roles, they would probably encourage that here too. That is my explanation of what may have happened. And don't forget, they wanted education. That is the colonialists, not the missionaries. Let's differentiate. The missionaries operated on the basis of they wanted education for Nigerians. All of those in the territories, because the missionaries that came in 1843, the CMS, the Methodist, Roman Catholic, and the rest of them, were supposedly engaged in some enlightenment project. They were supposed to be opposed to slavery. They wanted to civilize us. So their mission was slightly different from that of the colonialists. That is coming in pre-colonialism. However, by the late 19th century and early 20th century, they were beginning to synthesize their objectives, their presence here. By first taking out the black missionaries, Because when they came in 1843 etc., most of them were black missionaries, freed slaves who were already educated and who had a mission, you know. And they were doing well, according to the books. They were doing well with the missions, with Ajayi Crowther going to the to the east and working his way up to the Middle Belt, and the other missionaries working between Badagry, Abeokuta, and Ibadan. They were doing well. However, apparently they cooked up stuff against Crowther, eliminated the black missionaries, pushed them off, and then took over. So once this happened, they were synthesizing their objectives with the colonialists. And you know, for the colonialists, their own big thing was commerce, and they were pursuing that. But then, by the time they began to work together, I mean, then you find also Nigerians asking for more education, more funding for the education of their children. Once the missionaries came, and Nigerians started seeing, especially in the Lagos area, started seeing, I mean, this looks beautiful. We want our children educated. They started asking for more. Now, as they asked for more, as colonialism was taking foot, because more or less they were just trading posts all over. And I think there was the Niger company or something that was, yes. So the colonialism was like, yeah, just some Lagos colony, and then they spread, But then we had, I think the wars, the Yoruba, Parapo, Kiriji wars, all of the wars, and Yoruba started fighting one another, and then there was the jihad from the north that dismantled Oyo-Ile, and Yorubas got together, fought. But apparently, the British traders felt like these guys are getting in the way, I mean, of trade. Okay, so we will offer you protection, and that was how colonialism got hold. So once this happened, the objectives of the missionaries, who were now mainly white, and the colonialists, then started coalescing.
Through education, they were able to enforce gender binaries. This they did by only educating and employing bodies deemed as male, while their female counterparts were limited to employment deemed feminine and domestic servitude. It is widely believed that homosexuality, diverse sexual orientation, sexual identities and expressions were non-existent in Africa before the invasion of the colonial imperialist.
You know that when you have somebody putting their money into a venture, something else would happen. Their own values and philosophy would begin to be reflected where their money is. But I also know that the jihad of Usman Dan Fodio supposedly took women off the public sphere. But I've also read in the literature, again, I think it was Fafunwa, between Fafunwa and Pereira, Shaman, who were saying Usman Dan Fodio himself actually kept talking about the education of women. At some point, he was even saying something like, if you are not educating your women, you are just being hypocrites. He said that openly. And that his own daughters were educated. One was a poet. He intentionally got women to attend his lectures, kind of. They were present there, So it's like when you have a philosophy, a set of principles that you espouse, you are pretty clear. But the ones who will be your followers will then take another path, inflecting with politics and the rest of it, and their own ideologies and whatever. And apparently it was the ones who came after Usman Dan Fodio who then, got to reduce women's roles, especially in the public. That's for that. Now let's come to the South. If you have colonialists who are coming from Britain, like I said, and who have these particular views of women as inferior to men. And if you are going to spend money on education, you are going to have to just prioritize the one that is superior. That's number one. And I think this must be one of the reasons our own indigenous, governments came and started opening up the schools like Awolowo did. So if he opened up the schools and it was free education, I'm not sure anybody will be talking about girls can't go, because at that point, you are not thinking about the financial implications. Except again, for the matter of who will go to the farm. Exactly, yeah, because always there is something about the economics of it. And then they will resolve economic issues with patriarchal tools and lens. That is usually what they would do. So if you do not have free education and people have to pay for it, and you have a family where you have a boy, a girl, 2 boys, they would ordinarily just say, okay, you go and work so we can send your brothers to school. For the colonialists, they were not really interested in our education. They wanted manpower, that can serve the colonial structures. It was Nigerians who were pushing and insisting on what they wanted, And by the time we had full colonialism, especially by the time we had the amalgamation, the one who took over, Lugard, was absolutely upset about Nigerians and their noise. End quote. He couldn't really take it, because he just felt they were making too much noise around what they wanted. They criticized him a lot. They wouldn't let him be. They criticized his indirect rule, changes he was making to the courts. And he was accusing them of westernization and trying to live like a white person. But the point was, the hostility was mutual between the two, but he was being hypocritical. You want what we want. You want to be like us. Who are you? And he kept describing us like we were second-class, persons.
African people had very strong belief system before colonialism. Such belief system manifested in their socio-political thoughts, in their socio-political philosophy, in their architecture, in their culture, in their geography, in their horticulture, in their socio-political structures. They defined who they were, perhaps who they still are. And I will take the African society from the point of view of the Yoruba people, with whom I'm very familiar. And in doing that, I'm not breaking any rule. If you are versed in European and Western philosophy, everything started in that very tiny city called Athens in Greece. And so you produce a Plato, you produce an Aristotle, and then the thoughts of these people are called European thoughts. Okay? So I also have the intellectual right to say that whatever is Yoruba is African thoughts. After all, Yoruba is African. Igbo is also, other parts of Africa will be qualified to do so, but I'm taking it from the Yoruba point of view. So if you look at it from the Yoruba point of view, you see that at no time did the Yoruba people underplay any gender in the society. This is clearly stated in their indigenous knowledge system, especially the Ifa system. This is clearly stated in their proverbs. This is clearly stated in their socio-political structures and institutions. Let me start from the third one. In any palace that you ever get to in Yoruba land, till today, no king will take decision without an iyalode and perhaps an iyaloja. Because iyalode is a woman and the opinion of woman counts strongly within the Yoruba political worldview. That tells you that structurally, the Yoruba did not suppress the power of women. That's number one. Two, you also know that in Yoruba career system, women dominated the market. Men will go into the forest to farm, to, create wealth and bring to the market for their women to sell. 99% of palaces in Yoruba land are created very close to the market. That is done because the king wanted to hear the temperament of the polity through the voices of the women. Okay? That's about the structure. In terms of the socio-political thoughts, especially when it comes to the Ifa indigenous knowledge system, women are even considered superior. And I'm picking that word deliberately. Women are considered superior to men. If we go to the spiritual aspect, at the end of every man learning Ifa is an indoctrination system which is called Iwogodu. Without a woman leading, nobody will initiate that ritual. And of course, if you go to Igbo land, there are some women who will have become old after menstrual, performance, post 50, post 60. They turn them to men automatically. And whenever a man is not around, they take the role of women. We can have uncountable examples.
Studies carried out by Oyeronke Oyewumi, 1997, George Olushola Ajibade in 2013, and Ife Amaduime in 2015 on sexual diversities in Africa reveal that before colonialism in Nigeria, the Igbo and Yoruba tribes lived without restrictive gender norms. The pre-colonial women from Igbo and Yoruba regions wielded socio-economic and political powers that became less visible with colonization.
Africans, when it comes to their knowledge system, their social structures, do not underrate a woman. Even within the family setting, especially again in the Yoruba circle, there's what you call Olobinle. Olobinle. You have a family, the first wife to be married into that family has almost the equal authority of the head of that family, who probably is a male. If the male takes a decision and the yale pata says no, that man will not go ahead. Again, why? Because he knows the power and importance of women, as it were. So, in terms of structure, in terms of philosophy, in terms of knowledge, never underplay the role of women. Now, you may want to ask, how come today our society appears to, watch that phrase, appears to look like a patriarchal society? You want an answer to that? We got it from the pink people. The pink people in Europe. The pink people in America. The pink people who came to impose a religion on you, and in that religion, God is man, Jesus is man, all prophets of God are men. We never found that in Africa. In Africa, you had male deities, e.g. Shango, Olukosho, Arekujaye, Osefekifikiribija, e.g. Ogun, Lakaye, Osimole, Olominlefejewe, Olasonlefimokimobora, e.g. Oya Oriri, e.g. Osun Oriyeye. It was balanced. But when the pink people came to Africa and introduced Christianity and elevated God to one person with a male figure who was created in this and all this, we began to follow their concept. And of course, everybody now began to tend towards man being superior. Declaratively, in Africa, men were never superior to women. There were roles. There were roles in the society that both men and women had.
Colonialism also overturned the mystical resonance of powerful female deities such as Goddess Idemili, Yemoja, Oshun, as well as the public relevance of African women. This faulty premise poses the question: if diverse sexual orientation and gender identities did not exist in Africa, why did the colonists find the need to introduce draconian laws regarding this stance in Africa?
The gender bias thing, it's not just starting today. It started way back, even among the Orishas. There's this Odu that talked about how the Orishas came and the Oromoles, and everything they were doing, their day-to-day activities, they left out Oshun in what they were doing, and it got to a stage that everything was going not too good for them. So they had to go back to Olodumare and ask Olodumare that this is what we've been doing. The world is literally upside down, and everything we've been working towards, we've not been able to achieve it. So Olodumare asked them, "Where's your 16th person?" And they said, "Oshu, she's a woman. Why do we need her?" So Olodumare went like that. They should go back to the planet, and they should make her play a vital role. And so until then, so they came back to the planet, listened to what Olodumare told them. So they made Oshu, they made her play a vital role. It was until then that the world was restored, the peace came back, the love came back, the barren had children, and the world returned back to the safest. And so it's not just starting today, it went back as far back as the Oromole era. Yes, truly Yoruba is a non-gender language, but it's quite unfortunate in our present society how the gender bias is so bad. But according to the history, according to Ifa, and according to what we know, women play a vital role in the society, and they should be given that privilege to act more and to be involved in the day-to-day running of our society.
The denial of diverse sexual orientation was ingrained in Africa after the colonists despiritualized the Africans, making them question the morality of their cultures and beliefs.
Discovered that Islam predated Christianity, because Islam has been in West Africa and in the Hausa land in Yoruba as early as 15th century. You talk about the Ghana Empire, Mali Empire, Songhai Empire, Ekanami Borno. So all these ones around 11th, 12th, 13th century. The Christian came to Nigeria around 1840 something. That's when we are, because the advent of colonialism, or the advent of colonialists, they paved way for Christian missionaries. There's one thing that Islam has that that aided the fast spreading of Islam in Nigeria and West Africa, is that Islam supports polygamy, that you can marry you can marry 2 or 3 up to 4. Africa by nature, they marry many wives. So all these things are the factors that aided the spread of Islam in West Africa.
In 2009, Professor Wangari Maathani argued that the colonists systematically deprived Africans of their culture by labeling it the Dark Continent. They did this to achieve superiority and advance their economic aims. To keep this process top-notch, like their Arabic counterpart, Western imperialists embarked on civilizing, Christianizing, and commercializing Africa by eroding its knowledge, culture, language, and spirituality.
Boldly, I used to say boldly, that nobody can tell us the purpose of human creation. There's no discipline. The scientists, the philosophers, sociologists, anthropologists, and the rest of them, nobody can tell us the purpose of human creation. Nobody. But we can get that information from the Quran. And Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala say, I, Allah, created not the jinn and mankind except that they should worship me alone. So the purpose of human creation is for man to worship his creator. I did not create a invisible being as well as mankind except to worship. Why? What sustains us as human beings? What makes life
meaningful, or what is responsible for our existence, like sun, like rain, like a day and night, like oxygen, like a vegetation, all these things. Allah say He provided. He claimed it in the Quran, but He is the one who provided all these things for you. So if our existence relies on the work of Allah, so definitely we are created to worship Him. And worshiping Allah is something that's very simple. It doesn't take us more than 25 minutes in a day. Islam is based on two things: believe in the existence of God and do righteousness. That's what Islam is all about. Just to believe God exists and do the will of God. When you do the will of God, every human being, every living creature, and every non-living creature, they will feel your impact. As somebody who believes in God, somebody who actually indeed believes in God will never harm. Even the animal, let you know, is going to harm his fellow human being.
The emergence of the Western religion in our society is bringing about a total extinction of our culture and our spirituality. It's played a huge role in our culture going to extinction. As for education has, I guess here in Africa we could have used what the Asian what they did in terms of embracing the Western education, but not picking up the Western religion. Education is still playing a significant role in our day-to-day activity, but the Western religion, with all due respect to them, it's a huge setback for our culture, for our language, for spirituality. Nobody wants to hear about Isheshe. If you're not a Christian, if you're not a Muslim, you probably need to work times 3 of what they do. So it's a huge setback to our race.
The concept of Olodumare amongst the Yoruba is not in any way linked to religion. Yorubas don't worship God because Olodumare never asked any Yoruba person to worship him. Not in any fast scripture, not in any indigenous knowledge system. The idea of God worship belongs to the Christian and Islamic religions that were imposed on our society. God was there. It was true. When you worship God, what does it do to him? What people did in Yoruba culture was to appease deities and send them to the Olodumare, because they believe that whatever you need is going to be passed through that deity to Olodumare. And I'll give you an example. The Babalawo will never tell you to come back and be worshipping Ifa, because Ifa is not a religion. You will go back to your church and be worshipping your Jesus that you believe. We honor God and ask him what we wanted. So if I need a child, I will go to Oya and give Oya, something to help me tell Olodumare that I need a child. And then Olodumare will answer my prayer. That's our way of life. The Babalawo was for everybody. It wasn't for you as a Christian or for you as a Muslim. Ifa is a piece of philosophy. It can be used to guide any other person apart from the Babalawo. Shogo, Ogun, Oya, Obatala are all for everybody, including Alaji and Alaji. Okay? They are not religions. They don't force people to, they don't do evangelism. In other words, those people like Shogo, Ogun, Orunmila, Oya, Obatala, okay, Oshun, were human beings like you and I. They were born, they died. They ate, they went to the toilet. They fell sick, they got healed. They got married, they had children. There were high and down times for them. But they had certain qualities that were unprecedented. So Shogo, for instance, was known for his bravery and the use of firepower to execute judgment and fairness in the society. The Yoruba people therefore deified Shogo and called him the deity of fire, not the god of fire, as the case may be. Yorubas don't sing Shango. To worship in Yoruba is to sing. Have you ever heard a Yoruba man say mo sin Shango? No, mo bo Shango, I appease Shango, or I venerate Shango. That's the way it is, and that is how it is now.
The erosion of African spirituality, however, has also erased the holistic understanding of the unique differences and intrinsic values which Olodumare, a divine entity in Yoruba religion, blesses everyone with. In attaining spiritual transcendence, a person can obtain both the male and female energy in one body and merge as one. Ancient Yoruba culture does not shun, judge, or condemn this androgynous entity, but accepts and celebrates them as part of religious and cultural norms.
The shame attached to Nisheshe is basically the foreign religious teachings, because when you hear the teachings yourself, it doesn't fit, because it says you have to believe in the Son of God, which according to Isheshe, there's nothing like the Son of God. You have to perform all the 5 pillars of Islam. If you don't do things like that, with all due respect to them, it's like you're destined to go to hell. So it's the teachings that brings the shame, because they feel like, oh, you're unwanted, you're an unbeliever, and they can't even sit on the same chair with you. You're not destined to be there. You are not destined for greatness. So I wouldn't say it's education per se. No, it will be the teachings of the foreign religion.
From the existing research on sexual orientations, gender inequalities, and expressions in Africa, to the accounts of the Igbo priestess and Ifa priest, cultural practices in pre-colonial Nigeria neither criminalized nor demonized same-sex relationships, cross-dressing, or fluid gender expressions or identities. It was never Western importation or un-African. Christianity was imposed upon Africa, which makes it a Western importation. In 2013, Ajibade, in his study of same-sex relationships in Yoruba culture, discovered that Yoruba deity worshippers were being seen as wives regardless of their gender.
Inú gbogbo òòṣà Ṣàngó ló ní ajé lọ́wọ́ ju gbogbo àwọn irúnmọlẹ̀ yòókù lọ. Ìmúra rẹ̀ nípa arun dídì òòṣà fi kọ́ wa, kò sí ọkùnrin náà nínú ẹ̀dá tí wọ́n jọ jẹ́ òòṣà tọrọ wáyé tó lẹ́wà tó Ṣàngó. Ìtumọ̀ nu tí wọ́n pé Ṣàngó fi ń di irun pé kò sí gbogbo téèyàn bá ti wùlé orí tó o bá rí obìnrin tó bá ń bẹ ọmọ kan wò láti irun orí dé ìkànnì ẹsẹ̀ ọ wàá wò pé bọ́ọ̀lù obìnrin ṣe dáa tó báyìí ìní Ṣàngó náà wàá wò pé kí ni tó fi lè tó jẹ́ arẹwà ọkùnrin yóò dirun yóò lè láàrí yóò ṣọ̀ṣọ́ yóò fi lẹ̀kẹ̀ ọrùn. Ṣàngó òní máa ń ṣe ọ̀ṣọ́ tẹ́gbẹ́ yóò fi rí i pé ọ yàtọ̀ tí ó mú yàn lójú gbá eléyìí tó ń ṣe ìṣe arẹwà òòṣà ní Ṣàngó. Kò sóòṣà tó tí ì sọ pé òun rẹwà tó Ṣàngó nípa àmúra. Ọkùnrin ní máa ń wọ́pọ̀ jù tí ń gbé Ṣàngó. Obìnrin tí ó bá gbé Ṣàngó wọ́n tẹ̀sẹ̀ ṣe orò tí ó fi gbé Ṣàngó fún ni, torí gbogbo àwọn Ṣàngó àtọkùnrin àtobìnrin gbogbo àwọn adájọ́ Ṣàngó ọkùnrin ni gbogbo wa. Ọkùnrin ni Ṣàngó, ẹrú sìn rẹ̀ la jẹ́. So ìgbà tí Ṣàngó ti jẹ́ ọkùnrin ó yà pé ọkùnrin ni gbogbo wa. Tóbìnrin bá ti gbé Ṣàngó ó ti wà nípò ọkùnrin. Ṣùgbọ́n ìyàwó òun la jẹ́ gẹ́gẹ́ bí ìyàwó akọni fún Ṣàngó. Gbogbo èèyàn pátá ló lè wá tọrọ oore lọ́wọ́ Ṣàngó. Kò sí ẹnìkan tí ò lè wá tọrọ oore lọ́wọ́ Ṣàngó. Ìbá àjọkùnrin, ẹni tí ń fẹ́ rí ajé, ẹni tí ń fẹ́ rí ọmọ, ìwọ tó ya àgàn wàá tọrọ ọmọ lọ́dọ̀ Ṣàngó. Ìwọ tó ń wá okun kára rí ó lé yọ wàá tọrọ lọ́dọ̀ Ṣàngó. Gbogbo ẹ̀ pátá Ṣàngó wàá sọ pé nǹkan báyìí o lọ́ọ́ ṣe, lọ́ọ́ fórí rẹ̀ ní nǹkan báyìí, lọ́ọ́ fún Ọ̀rúnmìlà ní nǹkan báyìí, lọ́ọ́ fésù ní nǹkan báyìí. Yọ wàá jẹ́ atọ́nà fún, ṣùgbọ́n Ṣàngó ní ọ̀tẹ̀nu rẹ̀ jáde yóò sì ṣe fún.
This societal pushback confirms the modern-day erosion of prehistoric acceptance of diverse sexual orientation and women's political power. While Islamic sects are popularly known to exert physical violence on Nigerians that do not conform to their beliefs, Christian fundamentalists often do so by militarizing thoughts and actions detrimental to target groups, rights, and their mental, emotional, and physical well-being. Therefore, both Islamic and Christian fundamentalists in Nigeria have continued to deny women's rights and refuse to acknowledge the Africanness and human nature of diverse sexuality and gender identities.
One of the things that I love the most about African culture is the concept and the philosophy, which is universal across the continent, of respect. Respect is one of the most fundamental African principles that ever exist. It's the basis of everything, you know, respect for human life, respect for another life, a respect for living things. Like, I'll be really honest, since colonialism and the role of the missionaries and how our ideology and our philosophy has been disrupted, how it's been influenced by things that are not necessarily true to who we are. And on the topic of sexuality and gender expression, gender fluidity, you realize that the African understanding of the cosmos, of life, is rooted in this balance of the feminine and masculine, and it's kind of the flow between. There's so many case studies, there's so much evidence. The Chiboda people of Namibia and Angola, it had a third gender. And in this third gender, these people were highly revered, and they were their consultation was highly sought after, because they were believed to have spiritual gifts for being able to embody both the masculine and the feminine. That understanding of how the masculine and the feminine intertwine and dance together to create something is the basis of the Igbo cosmology, looking at how Chineke, which is often seen as God, or the creator in traditional Ordinani or Omenala Igbo religion. Chi na Eke, Chi and Eke is the masculine and the feminine, and they come together in order to produce the whole story behind, in order to actually produce a life and give birth to the world.
One Easterner who has undergone considerable change in the post-war years is Arias Kata. After 7 months and 7 days in isolation, he threw up his job as a male civil servant to become a female entertainer. He plays a thumb piano, which he always carries with him, acting the traditional role of entertainer of audiences from street urchins to royalty.
Although marriage in Africa is largely defined as a union of man and woman, and with all African countries with the exception of South Africa banning homosexual marriage, traditional African societies seem to have allowed the practice. According to historian Professor Kenneth Chukwuemeka Nwoko, PhD, women marriage of female husbands was more pronounced than might be expected in Africa, where it occurred in over 30 societies, including the Igbo southeastern Nigeria, the Zulu of southern Africa, the Noe of East Africa, and many others. There is also strong evidence of its existence in the Nandi tribe of Kenya. In these societies, women could be husbands without male wives. They were husbands to other women. In many traditional African societies, only well-to-do women were allowed to become female husbands. As Nwoko explains, in Igbo land, women were considered exceptional in the eyes of society due to their wealth and or social standing, and those who were past menopause could marry wives for themselves, for their husbands, for their sons, or for their siblings. The woman who paid the bride price of the other woman became the sociological husband. These influential women were usually viewed as men due to the fluidity of gender in the pre-colonial Igbo context.
and it was legitimate and it was recognized, and they lived in harmony within the society. They were not ostracized. They were there. So I think when we are presented with case studies like this, examples like this, we're made to kind of say, oh, hold on a second, this doesn't really add up. What do you mean that, being gay is un-African, or being, or homosexuality was never existed in Africa? How can that be? Africa is the cradle of human civilization. So everything that we see out there was already done here first. everything that we see out in the world, it had to start somewhere.
In Yoruba we say, Otoni tolu, Otoni tolu, Otoni toluwo. Men and women were not regarded as same. They were just regarded as equal. Sameness and equality are not the same. For instance, if you look at the pattern of dressing in Yoruba, the woman will wear what you call iro ati buba, primary dress, including yeri, which they also call tobi, and okun igbanu. These were peculiar to women. While men will have buba, shokoto, agbada, danjike, soro, and the same thing. But there is no rule that prevented a woman to dress like man, or that prevented a man to dress like woman. For instance, the Shango adherents would, even as men, plait their hair at specific period of history. Some of our women will wear trousers because they wanted to climb the tree. Okay? In other words, there were no very sacrosanct division between what a man and a woman could wear. Circumstances, situations, occasions will determine what people will dress like. That was the creativity, okay, and the organization, as well as the organization, I beg your pardon, of the Yoruba people.
While influential Christian religious leaders promote conversion practices, homophobic speech, and incite abuse, Islamic leaders and the Hizbah do similar through raids and indiscriminate attacks on LGBTQIA persons. They see homosexuality as an immoral and Western disease rather than the draconian laws. A century later, the language, cultures, and customs of these people have changed, and in some cases, total erasure. Aside from their loss of identity, poverty has deepened across the nation due to overpopulation and the poor preparation of the government to handle the economy, giving rise to religious fundamentalism, violence, and terrorism. There were no significant laws concerning gender identity or sexual orientation in Nigeria until the Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act 2014 and the proposed amendments to the Act, the Anti-Cross-Dressing Bill 2022.
Looks like they are not thinking. I mean, it's just senseless. Because we wear trousers. All of us wear trousers. In the North, trousers are supposed to be like protecting you. So you find many women, even when they have the whatever, with trousers under. So I don't get what they are talking about. My suspicion is maybe the civil society organizations are tired and people aren't shouting on top of their voices and telling them, listen, you are not getting it right. For many of us who are mothers, one of the things we tell our girls is, if in Nigerian universities, if you're going to lecture rooms in the evening and the rest, get into your trousers, wear your jeans, because that looks like safer than if you're in a short skirt, or a dress or something. So I don't know what cross-dressing means.
When you go down to back to your racials and you talk about cross-dressing and all those things, it doesn't work with them like that as it is being interpreted in this present day society. Because for example, a a Shango devotee will be dressed in what we call labi, a Shango attire that is almost like a skirt, and will always braid his hair, and he is even allowed to have piercings, which some other orishas might not accept. There are some orishas, for example, of the feminine orishas like Oshun, Yemoja, Oba, all those orishas that are feminine back then, but they have male devotees, so you expect them to sort of dress like a female during their festive period.
But I also think we should dare them to pass it, so that we can properly arrest them too. We are right about it to increase violence against women, but the truth is, also when the underdog suffers violence, usually people don't listen until it gets to a head. But when the one who is not supposed to be the underdog, when they suffer violence, very quickly people listen.
The infamous Islamic sect Boko Haram in Nigeria, responsible for the abduction of 276 Chibok girls in 2014, amongst other gross human rights violations, receives elitist support for its various nefarious activities. This group uses the Sharia law justification to tyrannize Nigerian gender and sexual minorities. Whether it's the police, the religious extremists, political elites, religious leaders, or the media contemporary Nigeria, their justification for spreading homophobia hinges on religion and myths about African values.
When my daughter was about 8, I needed to convey to her the idea of diversity. I wanted her to be aware that it's important to not discriminate. So I had to convey to her in a very simple way, yet have the principle that would apply so she could take that forward. I've forgotten what we were watching because I knew I would have to talk to her about persons of different sexual orientation, of different races, ethnicity, etc. So I said to her, do you know what? Among any category of persons, you would always have good people and bad people. And she looked at me and said, I said, yes. Any religion, Christianity, Islam, any ethnic group or ethnicities, any race, even people of different sexual orientation. Because if you're a Christian, you go to church and you will hear this about, gays and lesbians, you'll find people jumping up and down and, saying that, you will hear it. So I had to convey to her. I then said to her, let me ask you a question. Okay, so persons that we regard as lesbians and homosexuals, they are about persons of same sex that they love and the rest. But who would you rather deal with? The one who loves a woman, who is a man who loves a woman, but then abuses a child. She looked at me and said, okay, I wouldn't deal with the one that abuses a child. I said, okay, so that's it. If a lesbian, homosexual, or whatever does not abuse a child, does not abuse any of, just minds his or her own business, should that be your business? She said, no, Mom. I said, yeah, so that's it. I then said to her, so that is how to live life. Look to who is demeaning another person, who is shrinking the space for another person. Those are the people you have issues with. You do not have issues with people who are just minding their business. She's a young woman now, And I know that that stays with her all the time. So I had to get us to hold this principle that the persons we will have contempt for, that the persons we wouldn't deal with, will be persons who are bad in terms of demeaning others, oppressing others, being bad to other people, not persons who are just minding their own business.
One of the most important things is resistance. Nigerian women in particular have been resisting since pre-colonial times. They got women's vote and pushed for their professional education of women. For every step towards the pushback of imperialism, Nigerians have resisted the erasure of their identities. For the first time in Nigeria, LGBTQI persons participated openly in a nationwide protest calling for an end to police brutality. They did this against the backdrop of pushbacks from the populace who insist their concerns should be placed on the back burner for more important matters. But the troubles of the Nigerian gender and sexual minorities didn't start at that moment. It began before the amalgamation of Nigeria.